You know, one of the most dangerous things a woman can do in a relationship is slowly, almost imperceptibly, abandon herself in order to keep a man. It rarely happens all at once. It begins with the small, quiet compromises. You stop mentioning the book you loved because he mocked it. You change your tone to sound less intense because he said you're too much. You start reshaping your desires, your ambitions, your values, not because he asked you to, but because on some deep level you believed that being more of what he wants would make him stay. But here's the psychological truth. When you betray your identity to please someone else, you don't just lose them, you lose yourself. And in that loss, you become unrecognizable to the very person you were trying to hold on to. The irony is brutal. Esther Perel often speaks of how modern love has confused intensity with intimacy and performance with connection. Many women are performing versions of themselves that they think will be more lovable, more tolerable, more wife material. But real intimacy, the kind that sustains desire and respect over time, requires authenticity. It requires two people showing up as full selves, not half shadows, overting each other's needs. When a woman gives up her core, her voice, her truth, her preferences, she is no longer relating from a place of power. She is relating from a place of survival. And relationships built on survival don't thrive. They trap. And over time, resentment brews, not because the man took something from you, but because you gave it up, hoping he'd give you something in return. Maybe commitment, maybe security, maybe validation. But here's the thing. Love built on self-erasure will always leave you starving. There is a profound philosophical dimension to this. In existential terms, to exist is to assert one's freedom, to make choices based on personal meaning. When you surrender your identity for the sake of a relationship, you are, in essence, renouncing your existential freedom. You cease to be the author of your life and instead become a character in someone else's story. That's not love. That's abandonment masked as devotion. And let's not confuse this with compromise. Of course, love demands flexibility, empathy, the ability to meet the other in their world. But that's not the same as vanishing. Compromise happens between equals. Erasure happens when one person becomes the center and the other becomes a reflection. What many women need to realize is that you don't become more lovable by becoming less of yourself. In fact, the very things you dole down, your boldness, your fire, your complexity, are often the things that made you magnetic in the first place. When you shrink, you don't create closeness, you create emotional distance. Because people may be drawn to what pleases them, but they stay with what challenges them, what awakens them, what mirrors their own depth. So if you're constantly tiptoeing around your truth just to keep the peace, I invite you to ask, peace at what cost? Because here's what no one tells you. When you give yourself up, piece by piece, in hopes that someone will finally choose you, you're already showing them that you won't choose yourself. And if you won't choose yourself, why should they? Let that sink in. There is a fundamental truth in relationships that many people, especially women, struggle to fully internalize. Disrespect is not a phase, it's a pattern. And once it begins to show up, even in subtle forms, it tends to grow, not because the person is inherently cruel, but because boundaries once ignored signal permission. Now, let's be clear. Disrespect doesn't always arrive in obvious packages. It's not always screaming or name-calling or overt humiliation. Sometimes it's in the sighs when you speak, the dismissive comments disguised as jokes, the forgetfulness that feels deliberate, the subtle power plays, being left unread, being spoken over, being emotionally minimized. These micro-infractions chip away at your self-worth. And yet, women are often conditioned, both socially and psychologically, to explain them away. He's just stressed. He had a rough childhood. He's not used to relationships like this. And on and on. But here's what we have to understand. As Esther Perel often reminds us, the stories we tell ourselves to justify poor treatment are often more damaging than the treatment itself. Because those stories don't just protect the other person, they distort our own reality. They teach us that love must be earned through suffering, that disrespect must be endured for the promise of future tenderness. And psychologically, this creates what's known as intermittent reinforcement, a behavioral conditioning pattern where inconsistent reward, in this case, occasional affection, makes us cling harder, not less. It's the same mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive. You never know when the affection will return, so you keep investing, hoping the next spin will pay off. But what does this do to your inner life? It makes you question yourself. You begin to wonder, am I being too sensitive? Maybe I did overreact. And before long, you're not just accepting the disrespect. You're regulating your own perception to accommodate it. That's not self-awareness. That's gaslighting yourself. And let's talk about loyalty. There is a toxic misunderstanding of loyalty circulating in our culture. Women are praised for being ride or die, for staying through the storm, for loving him while he figures himself out. But love should never be an endurance test. Loyalty does not mean losing your voice. Loyalty does not mean tolerating harm. In fact, the highest form of loyalty is to yourself, to your own emotional clarity, your own standards, your own self-respect. Philosophically speaking, respect is the foundation upon which all other virtues in a relationship are built. Without it, love becomes dependency, intimacy becomes control, and the connection begins to rot from the inside out, even if it looks intact from the outside. You can't build something sacred on a cracked foundation. You'll just keep rebuilding the same house of pain. So when someone disrespects you, not once, not in an isolated moment, but in a pattern, you have to ask yourself, what am I teaching them about how to treat me? Because every time you excuse it, every time you accept it without consequence, you're training them, you're communicating your threshold. And for many women, that threshold is far too wide. You don't need another apology. You don't need him to promise he'll change. You need to reclaim the part of you that knows what you deserve and walk accordingly. And the truth is, the moment you stop tolerating disrespect, you stop attracting it. Let that be your new standard. There is a subtle but powerful trap that many women fall into when they are in love. It doesn't always begin with desperation or insecurity. Sometimes it begins with devotion, with a desire to give deeply, to love fully, to commit wholeheartedly. But that devotion, when unchecked, can quietly morph into a form of emotional self-abandonment. And before you realize it, your entire world starts to revolve around him. Your plans begin to center on his schedule. Your emotions adjust to his moods. Your needs shrink in the face of his problems. And your joy, it becomes conditional on his availability, his validation, his attention. You stop being the protagonist of your own story, and you become a supporting character in his. And here's the truth no one tells you. When you make a man the center of your universe, you don't pull him closer, you push him away. Esther Perel speaks often about the paradox of desire, that intimacy requires closeness, yes, but desire needs space. It needs mystery, independence, differentiation. It's not born from fusion, it's born from contrast. So when a woman collapses her life into a man's orbit, she doesn't just lose herself. She flattens the very tension that sustains autonomy. Now, psychologically speaking, this impulse to orbit another person often comes from a deep fear. If I don't stay close, I'll be forgotten. If I don't make myself essential, I'll be abandoned. And so, many women become hyper-available. They show up for every need. They answer every call. They prioritize his desires over their own, not because he demanded it, but because they believe it's the only way to keep the connection alive. But that kind of overfunctioning is a form of emotional control. It's not generosity. It's anxiety masked as devotion. And it often leads to an imbalance of power. The more you give without boundaries, the more the other person learns to take without thought, not out of cruelty, but out of conditioning. You've taught him that you'll always be there, that your time, your energy, your presence are guaranteed. And yet, what is guaranteed is rarely valued. Philosophically, we might say that love must contain a bit of absence to remain vital, a bit of distance. That distance is not rejection, it's space for the self. When two people maintain separate, meaningful lives and come together not out of need but out of choice, that is when the relationship becomes dynamic, not dependent. That is when admiration thrives, because we do not admire what clings to us, we admire what stands beside us with strength. So let me be direct. You are not here to orbit anyone. You are not a satellite circling someone else's existence. You are a whole, complex, radiant being. Your life must be filled with your own passions, your own friendships, your own solitude. That doesn't threaten love. It protects it. It gives it depth. If a man truly cares for you, he won't ask you to he will want to meet you in your fullness, not absorb you into his own needs. And the moment you stop making him the center of everything, you'll remember that the center was never supposed to be him. It was always meant to be you. Let that truth anchor you. There's a deeply romantic idea many women carry, that love is not only about who someone is now, but who they have the potential to become. And while that notion is beautiful in theory, in practice, it becomes a trap. Because too many women fall in love with a man's possibility and ignore the reality standing right in front of them. He's emotionally unavailable now, but he could open up someday. He's inconsistent now, but he might become more stable with time. He avoids commitment, but if you love him well enough, maybe he'll finally choose you. That kind of thinking isn't hope, it's projection. It's building a relationship not on who he is, but on the fantasy of who he might become. And that fantasy is powerful, seductive, even addictive. But it's also dangerous, because you begin to relate not to the person, but to the project. Psychologically, this behavior often stems from attachment wounds. When we experience love as conditional, when we are taught that affection must be earned, we learn to chase, to fix, to prove. We look at a man and think, if I can help him heal, if I can be the exception, if I can love him enough to become better, then I'll finally be safe. But the reality is, when you're busy sculpting someone into who you need them to be, you're not in a relationship. You're in a rescue mission. And no amount of potential is worth abandoning your present peace. Esther Perel talks often about the stories we create in love. We don't just date people, we date the story we write around them. And stories are sticky. Once we are emotionally invested in a narrative, we begin to ignore the data in front of us. We make excuses. We rationalize red flags. We tell ourselves, he's just scared, just not ready, just waiting for the right moment. But the truth is, this moment is the only truth you have. The way he treats you now, the way he shows up or doesn't, is the most honest indicator of who he is in relationship. We have to stop romanticizing potential. Potential doesn't return your calls. Potential doesn't show up on time. Potential doesn't make you feel seen, safe, or supported. The man you imagine he could be does not exist. The man who is in front of you does. And if his behavior consistently leaves you feeling anxious, uncertain, or unworthy, no imagined future will make that pain worth it. There's a philosophical clarity here too. When you love someone's potential more than their present, you're refusing to engage with reality. And love, real love, is only possible in the realm of the real. To love a person is to accept their current state, not bypass it in favor of a fantasy. When you wait on someone to become who you wish they were, you are not choosing love. You are choosing delay. You are choosing to live in the waiting room of your own life. Let me put it plainly. A relationship should not be a gamble where you trade years of loyalty in the hope of a payout that never comes. Your time, your emotional labor, your vulnerability, these are not down payments on someone else's growth. They are sacred, and they should be honored accordingly. So the next time you find yourself falling for who he might be, pause. Ask yourself, if nothing ever changed, could I thrive with who he is today? If the answer is no, then no amount of love will make him become the person you're dreaming of. Don't invest in potential. Choose presence. And remember, what you settle for now is what you live with later.